Folks, welcome. It's been a while since we had Victor Davis Hanson on the program. I'm very happy to have him back, but sorry for the circumstances, which is to say the horrific fires in California. Victor Davis Hanson, welcome.
Thank you.
Uh, what's on your mind? There's so much to say. What would you say? What do you say?
Well, it was a total, I guess we call it in ancient history, a systems collapse, civilizational collapse. I mean, the mayor was in Ghana at a cocktail party when she was warned about the Santa Ana winds. She was a lifelong Castroite, head of the Black Caucus.
Oh, wait. A lifelong Castroite is the
Yeah.
mayor of Los Angeles?
Yeah, she'd gone to Castro, I think Cuba to see Castro 8 or 9 times. She lamented his death and called him El Jefe, Comandante. He was muerte. He was sad. He was sad. She was the head of the Black Caucus in Congress. She promised that because she had a reputation for junketeering all over the world to leftist regimes as a congresswoman, she'd stay in Los Angeles. She was warned about the winds, that the chaparral had not been cleared, that there was not sufficient water, that she'd cut the fire department by $17 million and wanted to cut it by 50, that she'd pointed an LGBTQ activist as the fire chief who bragged that she was going to hire 70% DI. And what happened was expected. And then her deputy mayor, Brian Williams, who in charge of public safety, he was basically under house arrest because he had phoned in a bomb threat to the city council. So then you got down to this fire chief, and she said, I don't know. My responsibility starts with the hydrants, and there's no water. Well, that's crazy. I mean, you've got responsibility to make sure there's water in the hydrants if you're the fire chief. The vice fire chief was on record of saying that I think that when a fire person arrives at a house, you'll feel more comfortable if it looks like you, he, she. She's also said if a male, I have to carry out a male, the male's in the wrong place during an emergency. All these crazy things. I could go on forever.
Or I just want to ask a question because I don't live in California.
Yeah.
Is most of the leadership uh, in the fire department in Los Angeles uh, overweight lesbians?
That was the caricature because the fire chief is, the assistant fire chief is, there's rumors the mayor is.
Well, listen,
They don't represent the demography. If you wanted to represent the demography of California according to leftist terms, then you would have an Hispanic male as fire chief, and you would have a white male as person, and then you would probably have a heterosexual woman if you wanted
well,
to represent the majority proportionally. But it
of course,
wasn't.
even the fact that we're talking about this, it's so preposterous. I mean, everyone knows it's preposterous on its face, but when then a horror like this unfolds, it seems to me if there's a silver lining that people who have not woken up to the madness of this are waking up. I can't help
That's
but
a
think that,
$64,000
yes,
question. So how
yeah.
do you get? The question is, how do you get to a state that has a history of fire, huge fires under Democratic governors, mayors, when they don't clean the forests, they blow up dams. They do not. They blew up 4 dams. They did not build $7 billion of dams they were supposed to. They don't clear the chaparral. They've destroyed the timber industry that gleaned the forest. How do you get there? And the answer is we haven't had a Democratic statewide office holder, not lieutenant governor, not attorney general, not controller, in almost 20 years. The legislature, both houses of the state legislatures have super left-wing majorities. The city council of Los Angeles, 15 people on it, not one Republican. 9 congressional seats are Republican out of 52. So why is that true in California? Because of the tax burden, the horrible schools, the horrible infrastructure, under Jerry Brown and Gavin Newsom in the last term of Arnold Schwarzenegger, the old Reagan, Dugmasian, Pete Wilson voter left, 10 million left to Tennessee, Wyoming, Nevada, etc. And then we had more illegal aliens in California than all the other states combined. There's probably 10 to 15 million came, and they came from the poorest areas of the world in Latin America and Mexico. And that was in Medi-Cal. Medi-Cal is 30% of the budget. And then, and finally, we had this tech boom where we have $9 trillion in market capitalization. So we had kind of a medieval state with liberal tech barons who enriched the economy, but they had utopian dreams. So the green DEI comes from these people,
Right.
wealthy, white, and Asian activists. That we were the lab rats, the people. And that's where we got to this democratic monopoly, and that's where these crazy policies came from. And that's why these fires turned into Dresden because of the policy.
Are you at all sanguine about the possibility of change that it's been so horrific that someone must answer, that Gavin Newsom will leave office, that Karen Bass will leave office? Any sense that that could happen, that there's going to be a popular outcry for that?
Well, there had been rumblings like a volcano, noises that the effort to repeal the prohibitions on DEI hiring, the old Prop 209, they tried to overthrow it 2 years ago, and that Prop 13 won overwhelmingly to keep a ban on race, not that the bureaucrats obeyed it, on racial hiring. And then the reparations effort by Gavin Newsom fizzled. And then most recently, in the last election, there was a ballot proposition the people put on over the objections of Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom to bring back felony consequences for shoplifting of any kind and get rid of the $950 exemption that had greenlighted. And that passed. So when you have here in the Central Valley from which I'm speaking, you have a lot of conservative Hispanic second and third generation who are now taxpayers, and they run the city councils and they have to pay taxes, and they are furious about the open borders, especially that there's half the people coming in under the new waves are not from Mexico. They're from China, they're from Russia, they're from Ukraine, they're from Latin America, and they don't have an expatriate lobbying facility that the Mexican immigration did. So they're not vested in open borders, but they are angry they have to pay for it. So there's a lot. So Fresno County, from which I'm speaking, it's always blue. It's about 70% Hispanic. It flipped red in the last election. 5 counties did. And where these fires hit, if you know Los Angeles, Pacific Palisades, even Altadena, which is a middle near Palisades, but especially Pacific Palisades is the most beautiful place in Los Angeles. B, it is old established liberal money. And when you couple it with nearby Malibu, Hollywood, this is the most leftist enclave in Los Angeles and the wealthiest. And they now have been wiped out by the people they voted for. And this is not the end of it because they have to take away the carnage. They've got to get building permits. They've got to be allowed to build. They're in the jurisdiction of this Maoist, Stalinist coastal commission of unelected utopians that stops all development within a certain 2 miles of the coast. So it's going to be a fight. And Gavin Newsom is under criticism from these people. So yesterday he said, I'm going to let the Coastal Commission edicts that stop you from rebuilding, I'm going to put them in abeyance. They're not going to be applicable to you. But then everybody said, rather than being rewarded for that, they said, well, if it was such a bad idea now, why didn't you do it before? So that's sort of what they're saying. And then the DEI and the homeless, suddenly these people are, you can't talk about homeless starting fire. Everybody knows the homeless start fires. They go out on the hillsides, they're cold in the winter, they light fires to keep warm. Now they've caught 3 or 4 of these people, and you could not mention homeless. Karen Bass said 4 years ago, don't blame the homeless for fires. Well, now they're seeing them. So people like the Kardashians are saying, this guy's lighting fires. I saw him. And then the looting, the DEI loot. I mean, there's a lot of people from minority communities that have not been jailed for serial crimes by Mr. Gascon, who was just thrown out, the DA. And so now we've found just 2 arsonists this morning that had long records. And
We're
so,
going to go to a break. Forgive me. We'll be
yeah.
right back, folks, talking to Victor Davis Hanson. Welcome back, folks. I have the privilege of speaking with Victor Davis Hanson about what's going on in California. Victor, you've said so much, and most of it is descriptive. It's horrifying. I keep wondering whether there's enough of a tipping point. The horror really cannot be comprehended. When we're talking about something like 30,000 acres, it's frankly incomprehensible. And we'll be dealing with this for a very, very long time. But the horror of it reminds me of what happened October 7th, over a year ago in Israel. People woke up, billionaires, Bill Ackerman, whatever, who had been funding the lunacy, finally said, enough is enough. I'm out. I wonder whether some of that can happen here.
Yeah, I think it can. I mean, when the Germans bombed Rotterdam in 1940, they burned out 9 acres of downtown Rotterdam. When we had the worst bombing in history, never had a worse, there's never been a more catastrophic fire bombing than March 9th in Tokyo, with the B-29s dropped napalm on it for 8 hours straight. It burned out about 20 to 40 acres of the center, and then then in the periphery, maybe 300 or 400 acres. This is something worse than Dresden, not in terms of death, but because there was evacuations, but in terms of the actual core burned out, it's worse than Hamburg or Dresden or Cologne. And so it's made an impression on people, especially when you go back, these scenes where these people are trying to go back to these 10,000 homes. 10,000, and they're dehoused. They had a word in World War II called dehousing. Bomber Harris. This is what happened. So they have safes. All these rich people had safes with gold bars in it and documents, and they're sitting there in the rubble, and looters are just trying to swarm in, and they're trying to sneak back in and arm themselves. These are left-wing people, and sort of say, if anybody has a house in Pacific Palisades, can you sneak back in and protect all the burned lots around you from looters? Because the National Guard and the police can't stop it. Because they have a culture in Los Angeles, as in California, that it's okay to steal. Because we've had this problem where, you name it, Nordstrom's, Kroger, all of these stores are shutting down in the Bay Area and the LA area from mass looting and shoplifting. And that attitude is very hard to break. And so now you have the people who shoplift and steal, they're accustomed to no consequences, and now they've got 10,000 lots wide open, and they know there's safes and valuables that were hidden or protected from fire in fireproof lockboxes and safes. So they're trying to get in there and steal them, and it's.
I mean, is the word for this not simply anarchy? How is this anything but anarchy when cops, National Guard cannot protect homes, valuables, when you allow shoplifters to shoplift? It seems to me an utter abdication of the most basic social contract. It's just the most basic stuff, completely turned over to evil, to malevolent forces. I, I hope, as I said, that this is so awful that it pushes people to do something about it. I want to ask you, just we've got moments left, but typically when things go south, people turn to the federal government. Oh, will you bail us out? Well, like, we've really, really, really screwed up. I'm a drug addict. Will you please give me some money because I have no place to live? You don't give a drug addict money. The question is whether the federal government, which is to say Donald Trump, will say, yes, we'll help you if, only if you do X, Y, and Z. Gavin Newsom, you're out. Karen Bass, you're out. You have to implement this and this and this and this. Otherwise, you don't get any money. it's like Ford to New York City, drop dead. How do we determine whether the
Well,
federal
it's going to
governments don't
take
want to
about,
subsidize this lunacy?
they're already talking about the value of the homes versus how many were destroyed versus the infant. It's up to $500 billion, $500 billion. So they need a federal czar to come in there and to allot money directly to the fire or the police or the scavenging companies to get rid of the debris and not go through Karen Voss. I'll just end you with the anecdote of the water and power czar announced that she was the first Latina and she was going to be a diversity hire. She makes $750,000 a year. She came from a checkered record at PG&E. She replaced a former director 2 directors ago who was in prison now for taking bribery. He was the head of Power and Water. And wait, the whole thing could have been saved in Palisades. There was a 120 million gallon reservoir on the top of the city for this purpose. It was bone dry because it had a tear in the cover. And she thought because it had a tear in the cover, air or debris, it wasn't for necessarily water. So they drained it over almost a year ago and it sat there dry. And then she said, well, we only had 3 million gallons of reserve water. That was the problem. But she didn't tell people, well, I shut down a 120 million gallon reservoir because we're too incompetent to fix it. And over 300 hydrants had been stolen and I didn't really replace them and I didn't have water. So that was what we got for $750,000. And that made a big impression. And nobody would turn over money to that person because if they did, it's like giving a match to an arsonist.
In a civilized culture, leaders like this would be drawn and quartered. Um, Victor Davis Hanson, always encouraging to talk to you, even on the bleakest of subjects. God bless you. Thanks for being my guest.
Thank you.